Gala! Yeah! Bra, 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 bra. Okay. And what will we do after we've done the we will be giving away our £5,000. Somebody is £5,000 coming. You are coming at perfect. It's like he knew. My friend stepped in perfect time. You're getting a Mr. Akala. Are you there, sir? Please come in. Come in.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. I'm here.
What amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. You guys should know that Akala did not ask for a fee for this. He asked you to donate money to the Hurricane Fund in the Caribbean. So do that. Akala, thank you so much for being here. As I was saying before, I mean, I know I've seen you been down to Edinburgh TV Festival. You've been down to the Edinburgh TV Festival before, and they do this thing, they make target lecture. And I really wanted us to have our own moment where we can reflect about the industry from our point of view. And I couldn't think of, as an inaugural speaker, anyone better than yourself. So I'm going to jump backstage. I'm going to give you the stage. I know that you're going to talk about the importance of ever evolving, keeping yourself kind of open and fresh. The industry, as you know, you recently started a production company. Congratulations. But it's a downturn, right? And what can we do in this moment to keep ourselves kind of up, moving, and creating content? So, King, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you. So as far as I understand, I'm going to talk for about half an hour, and then you guys are going to ask questions as well, right? And then we're going to engage. So I've been given a brief. Firstly, to intro. For a long time, I ran a youth educational foundation called the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company. Obviously, touring musician as well, and so on and so forth. But in terms of production, it isn't recent actually me starting a production company. I've had a production company in one iteration or another since about 2011. What is recent was getting the investment and more visibility around the company. But I've had a company since about 2011. Produced a couple of shows already. So produced a show called Akala's Odyssey, which was, as you'd imagine from the title, a show about the epic poem Homer's Odyssey, sort of documentary about that, which was quite interesting and original, and something probably people wouldn't expect as much from me, and was really important to me to not get boxed in, which is one of the reasons I really, really enjoyed doing that project there. Then my hello. I'm hoping you guys can all still hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
It keeps kicking me out of the room and saying it's been logged on somewhere else. Just so you know, that's why if I leave, that's why I've left. So it seems like some sort of technical problem. It isn't that I'm logging off. Just FYI. But yeah, so back to what I was saying. Everyone can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, The Ruins of Empires was a graphic novel that I wrote, and we turned that into a piece of theatre using games engine technology, TV theatre for BBC Two, in collaboration with Andy Serkis's Imaginarium Studios. And that was, a really challenging project, actually. We had two directors both have a parent pass away. And so we went from having a year to make a project to having just 4 months to make it, along with all of the other challenges that you would expect to come with producing a television program. So it's been a long journey to the visibility around the production company. I wrote a script in 2011 that didn't quite get made. So there's been a number of iterations and a number of endeavors along this journey. And I think one of the reasons for me and what was so important about setting up my own production company was it allows me to choose, or production studio rather. We think of ourselves more of a studio because we like to originate and develop our own IP rather than simply acquiring IP externally, if that so much makes sense. But I feel like having my own company gives me the flexibility to choose when to outsource IP, when to collaborate with someone else, when to sell off, at what stage to do. It just gives me that flexibility. Obviously, you understand you can't do everything yourself. You need collaborators. And I just think having your own company gives you a place to warehouse that and that flexibility. We're still an indie and a startup. And I think we've gone through sort of all of the challenges that you'd expect. A lot of it is about, having a talent-led company, especially presents its own challenges. I think there's a inherent conflict between capital and labor anyway, an inherent conflict between talent and financiers, even if everyone's got the best will in the world and the best intentions in the world. And none of this is exclusive to the TV industry. There are just those sort of inherent conflicts of interest. And then there are the layers that are specific to our industry. So we face those challenges as well with partners and with financiers and those general difficulties in making programs. I think for Black and Brown creative specifically, it's the challenge of wanting to tell, quote unquote, your own stories. But what does that mean in this context as well? Wanting to tell stories about your own culture, your own experiences, your own background, your own upbringing that may be difficult, recognizing the importance of having a diversity of voices, but at the same time, not getting boxed into being said, right, you're a Black creative or you're an Indian creative or you're from this particular background, therefore you can only tell stories within that world. Whereas, The Wire was written by a white guy, Top Boy was written by a white guy. One of the greatest manga stories of all time is a story about the Vikings, but it's a Japanese manga called Vinland Saga, right? So having that creative freedom to tell whatever stories appeal to you, and not simply being told, right, you're of this identity group and therefore you're only qualified to tell this particular set of stories. You may choose to want to do that. You may choose to not want to do that. Again, having your own company, if it's a possibility, is a way to have that sort of freedom to do some of that. But it doesn't guarantee that. It's still difficult. You still got a company to run. I'm lucky to have a very, very good team. As well as having that experience there. In terms of why starting a production company at this time, well, as I was addressing before, it isn't actually new. It's always something we've wanted to do and the team has wanted to do and been going for a while. But in terms of getting an investment, that's at this time. It is a difficult time in the TV industry. There is a economic downturn. Obviously, there's been the strike in the States for the last few years. But I think there still hasn't been a better time to be a creative than now. So I think that's one. There are more outlets for your creativity. There are more ways to get to an audience. There are more ways to get your creativity out there. There are more platforms than there have ever been. So it's still a relative downturn within a context of, many of us, I presume most of us in this room, grew up at a time with 5 terrestrial TVs, in my 5 terrestrial TV channels. I'm old enough to remember when Channel 5 started, right? So there were, 4 channels before that. And in my home, at least, we certainly didn't have cable most of the time growing up. Again, that's the age we're coming from. Very, times were hard. So it was just very much those 4 channels. So I think we have to remember how far we've come, even as a musician. When I started my career as a musician in 2004, YouTube didn't exist yet. I mean, it was still Channel U days. It's almost inconceivable for young people growing up now, young aspiring musicians growing up now, to imagine trying to create a viable music career without YouTube, without social media. And so then the challenges they're facing are in this new world where there are the same historic challenges between capital and labor and unfair deals and challenges getting yourself, and yet you've got a much broader canvas than ever before. Streaming on the one hand has obliterated, and I think this is has relation to TV. In the music industry, streaming has really obliterated physical sales. So that source of revenue has evaporated, and yet even independent artists now have a global audience in a way that they didn't have before. So that's the sort of trade-off. It has really devalued physical music as a revenue source, but touring revenue has never been so high, and that's been the trade-off there. In the scope of TV, I feel like when it was just the terrestrial channels, you had to make material with the broadest possible appeal, and therefore, lots of stuff could be a bit vanilla because it has to sort of appeal to everyone. You couldn't take the risks that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years, the big shows that have changed television, firstly coming out of the States with a lot of the HBO material, and then you think about the kind of things you have now. It would have been unimaginable when I was young to have Gomorrah or Italian Narco, Squid Game, Shogun. You think about the level of cultural exchange now and a global audience in the English-speaking world for subtitled shows, not just, one film, but 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 hours. So it's important to remember, even if we are in a relative downturn, we are in a great place in this particular industry with a global audience in a way we've never had before, with an outlet for really original, really creative voices tackling really, really difficult issues. So I think that's one of the other reasons for me. I feel that some of the best art in the world today, or over the last 30 years at least, has been made, particularly in the TV medium. If I think about scripted television, Sopranos, Mad Men, Peaky, Billions, Shogun, to quote a more recent example, there's been so much fantastic stuff made over the last 30 years that I don't think would have got an opportunity to be made at any time before that. And so I feel like it's a really exciting industry to be a part of, just as a creative. And then politically, I think the value of our stories being told and being told in a way that is authentic. The thing about that is, there's a reason why for a very, very long time, if we look at, say, the origins of Hollywood in the States, and we look at the role that Hollywood had for a very, very long time, arguably now, still to an extent, but to a lesser extent than before, in promoting particular stereotypes of groups of people. The first Hollywood blockbuster was actually a film that was sort of glorifying the Ku Klux Klan, right? So you think back all the way to that sort of history and playing on those sort of stereotypes. Some of you, again, may be old enough to remember a film called Hollywood Shuffle. Does anyone remember that film? Yeah. And sort of that film was poking fun at the way in which Black people had been traditionally depicted in Hollywood as criminals and pimps and thieves and really nothing else, and the sort of inside joke of the Black guy dying first and all this kind of stuff, which I think is what has prompted some of these trends around like strong Black lead, for example, right? That kind of thinking around not having Black characters that are simply caricatures and cardboard cutouts or merely a support for the real characters in the show. So if we think about the way in which depicting particular groups in one-dimensional ways, in stereotypical ways, in inauthentic ways, really has a real political impact. It affects the way those groups of people are policed. It affects the kind of jobs they can get in the rest of the jobs market. It is a form of advertising. It is a form of branding. If we think about the reverse of that and the kinds of diversity of, again, we're looking at Black content here, but I'm thinking also just about the broader content that is now being shared across the world, where cultures are getting to speak for themselves in a way that they never have done before. But if we think about the range of Black shows on television over the last 20 or 30 years, most of them obviously Black American shows in the English-speaking world. If we think about Insecure on the one hand, Atlanta on another hand, The Wire on another hand, you start to get a much fuller sense of the Black American experience, that there are shockingly, there are very different types of Black people, right? There are Black people have all of the same nuances and differences in value and differences in behavior of any other group of people. And the political implication of telling those sort of wide stories, especially when the protagonists are different to yourself, is when you follow a story like that, when you follow a character like, first of all, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to like a character. Did we like Pablo Escobar in Narcos? I'm not sure. But we understood him and we found him compelling enough to follow. Did we like Tony Soprano? I must admit, I kind of did like Tony Soprano, even though I know he was objectively a bad person, right? But the point is, we empathized with Tony Soprano and wanted to follow him and understand him and essentially walk in his shoes. So the point in telling our stories and being able to tell them in a way that is authentic and real and nuanced, even without romanticization, is that people from outside your in-group, so to speak, who may believe in some of the caricatures, who may only have been exposed to previously a one-dimensional view of who you and your people are. Now walking with these characters and walking with these types of people, oh, I never knew that about this group of people, or I never thought they thought that way, or this thing that happens in my family too, or in my group, oh, they can relate. And so stories really, really have a huge political implication, which is why I think for so long and continuing, there is a battle about who gets to tell those stories, how they're told, who's in charge of how they come out, and so on and so forth. In terms of for yourselves as creatives, overcoming the noise was one of the ideas of and ways of thinking about this. Is you are an original. You are the only you. You are the only person like yourself. You are the only person with your perspective. You are the only person who's had your unique combination of experiences and books you've read and musics you've listened to and your particular upbringing. All of those things that have gone into making you, no one else can have that perspective. And I think here, to use a UK rap analogy, for a very, very long time, when we were trying to imitate Americans, again, I'm old enough to remember when a lot of UK rappers still rapped in American accents. We never cut through. Trying to be American wasn't getting it done. It was only when we became more ourselves, more original, more local, more specific, that we managed to get that audience. The combination of that originality and, again, the internet, because without the internet, I don't think the traditional music industry would have embraced UK hip hop in the way that the consumer has, the global consumer has. So that originality of voice, that originality of tone, that originality of purpose is unique to you. And I think that's the only way to cut through the noise. And in terms of inspiration, I think it's worth, there's a really, really great book called The Revolution Was Televised. Has anyone read that book yet?
Hey.
And I would recommend everyone in the room read that book. And the reason why is that book, I mean, there's loads of others I would recommend, but the reason why I would say that book is because that book is specifically about the making of classic shows that we now would all think, how can anybody not have seen how amazing they were going to be? It's about Sopranos and Mad Men and True Detective and all those basically big American TV shows, the first HBO, and then the rest of American TV sort of being dragged into the world that HBO were creating and trying to compete, telling authentic, original, edgy, lyrical, brilliant human drama. But when you look at what so many of those people had to go through to get those shows made, and when you think about the talent of those people, and still when you read they had to go through this and this and this, and were rejected this many times and went from this broadcaster to that, all the things that you think don't happen to the David Chases of the world do happen. They're obviously more pronounced if you're from a different identity group or you're a woman or whatever else. There's going to be a whole other layer of challenges on top of all of that. But just the challenge of being a creative and trying to get your ideas out there, no matter how brilliant and fantastic and obvious it seems once the show is in the public domain, and how much of a hit it becomes once it's out there, you'll find that most of your favorite shows and most of your favorite creatives went through, pardon my French, a whole bunch of bullshit to get their stuff made. And we're in a very insecure position for a very long time, many times faced potential cancellation or not getting renewed and so on and so forth. Why is that important? Because I don't want you to get disheartened, right? We shouldn't get disheartened, and we shouldn't think that this struggle and the difficulty of doing what you love for a living is unique to you or unique to us. And remembering that it is ultimately, there's a great Denzel clip that's been circulating over the internet the last few weeks. You may have seen it, where he's in a room with loads of other creators. Martin Scorsese's in there, loads of people, Oliver Stone's in there. Denzel sat at this table and he's like, listen, let's remember it's just a movie. Now, I don't mean that to demean mine or yours or anyone else's creativity. The point Denzel is making, and he says this a number of times in there, it's an extraordinary privilege to be able to tell stories for a living, to be able to create, to be able to imagine, to be able to think up ideas and express them in a creative way and get paid to do that. In the scheme of the world, it's an extraordinary privilege. And so it's always worth us keeping that in mind as we face the hardships we face and the difficulties we face. Nonetheless, remembering, we're not saving lives for a living necessarily. We're not on the front line of a battle somewhere. We're not doctors and nurses and firefighters and so on. And none of that is to demean what we do. I think art is tremendously, extraordinarily, fantastically important, but nonetheless consciously aware that we are extremely fortunate to be doing what we're doing. And it's always worth keeping that in mind. I think there are a number of lessons for me personally that have come out of being an athlete. You know, when I was much younger, before Hip Hop Shakespeare, before music, before the production company, before many other things I've done, my first career, typical young man from the ends, I wanted to be a footballer and was a full-time footballer for a little while. Played for West Ham for 5 years. And one of the great things about being an athlete, many great things actually, but a few of the great things that jump out for me that I think are relevant to this. Number one, it's one of the few places in life where you're forced to just go, that person was just better than me. There was a day in training. So my era at West Ham was Jermaine Defoe, Leon Britton, Joe Cole, Michael Carrick, Rio, all of that sort of golden era where West Ham produced probably half the England team. And my specific year group was me, Glenn Johnson, Anton Ferdinand, lots of people like that. I moved up a year because, you know, I was reasonably good. And I remember the first day in training, I had to mark Jermaine Defoe in training. I was a defender. And that was one of the days I went, oh, like I'm really out of my depth. Like this person really is a lot better than I am. And it's okay. Like you can't be the best in the world at everything. Everyone has a ceiling. We have different levels of ability and discipline and different proclivities and different talents, right? And sport is one of the few things that I find very early forces you to go, that person was just better than me. But the other things, I think the discipline, I think lots of people, and again, probably not so much in a room like this, have experienced people who are in the industry, but I think lots of people outside the world of creativity wait for inspiration. I can't remember if it was Stephen King who said something like, yeah, no, you know, I make sure I'm inspired at 9 a.m. every day, Monday to Friday, right? And what he meant by that was that this inspiration, yeah, you're lucky. It might come one every 10, every 20, every 30 days as a writer or as a creator. But really, this is a job like any other job. You acquire skills, you build on those skills, you work on those skills and on that craft. And yeah, some days you have wonderful days in the office where the writing is just coming out very quickly and very easily. But most days it's distractions, it's life-in, it's trying to get as much done as you can. It's a job. And I think that's something that a lot of creatives specifically are not ready for, is the mechanics of it being a job. Whereas I feel, as someone who, you know, had almost a career as an athlete, that was the thing that I loved so much. That was my passion that I was really into. And that at a certain point, it became a job. And having to deal with the reality of the thing you love as a job and the difficulties that come with that is not always an easy thing to traverse or think about. And again, that's before we even add in the specific challenges, I think, facing Black creatives specifically, or Black and brown creatives specifically, I would say, and for women also, I would say, because, and I think it feeds into even the writing, the pressure of, as a writer, when you write a character that isn't a white male, and even then, for white men, you still have to factor in social class. If you're white, if you're writing a white male character that isn't upper class, that is a working class character, and so on, and feeling like you have to write a character that is a representative of an identity group, and you don't want to be boxed in creatively, but you also don't want to promote stereotypes and be insensitive and so on. And I think those constraints, I think they're edging away a bit more now. I think about some of the stuff that's come out of Shondaland. You think of the Black female leads that have come out of How to Get Away with Murder or Scandal and so on, and characters that have done what would on the face of it be really, really unlikable things, but because they're so well drawn, they never become stereotype of the angry Black woman or stereotype of this, that, and the fourth. Like there's a skill, and of course it's no surprise to me that that's come out of a hub run by a Black woman, which is not to say that only Black women can write authentic Black female characters, but I think for that to be a sustained, same with Insecure, for that to be a sustained sort of drive, it has come from people within that group, right? Where you can write, and Annalise Keating is one of my favorite TV protagonists, and she does some really, really unlikable things. She helps her students to cover up murders. She cheats on her husband. She does some really, really unpleasant things. But because we understand her and we like her and we empathize with her, we want her to win. And so I think those creative boundaries where before, no, Annalise never, someone's just said in the chat, Annalise never killed anybody. She didn't. I said she helped her students to cover up killing. I mean, that's literally the premise of the show, right? It's her helping her students to cover up the fact that they murdered someone. So Annalise never killed anybody herself, but she helped to cover up a number of murders, right? That is the premise. And yet we love her. We'd be heartbroken if something bad happened to Annalise. And I think for a very long time, it seems to have been difficult for people to draw Black women in such an authentic and rounded and well-shaped way. And so sorry, what was that?
No, you go ahead. No, perfect. Okay. Sorry, my mistake. I wanted to stand in the
Okay, sorry, Akala. I'm going to move this way so you can actually see all the people you're talking to as well. Please.
Hello, all the people. And yeah, so I think those boundaries are being pushed where you can have Top Boy and you can have I May Destroy You. When I was young, we used to joke about it all the time. You may remember that Real McCoy sketch where, again, I'm showing my age here, right? Where the kids are in the house and they go, Mummy, look, come in. Black people are on the telly. And when the TV pans round, there's two Black people sat on top of the television. They're not literally on the telly, right? And Real McCoy was poking fun of the fact that, Black people back then were never on the television. And when we were on the television, again, I think it would be hard for people who weren't around in the 80s and even the early 90s to really understand just how appalling the depictions of Black people on the television were back then. And not to act like we've got it all done, but to be in a world where you can have a Daniel Kaluuya, Damson Idris, Idris Elba, where you can have Top Boy and Supercell and a sort of much more rounded depiction of Black life in Britain, and we've already quoted some of the shows from the States, is a massive improvement on where we were before. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's still so much great creative worlds to be explored. You may remember that play Misty, and there was a statement in the play where one of the Black female characters says to her friend who's written what she calls, a stereotype play or a Negro play, she says to him, I want a cycling through a city montage. And what she meant by that was, we're still not in a place necessarily where shows about Black people just doing normal stuff, right? Just living life, falling in love, going to the stuff that we all know internally, even in the ends, even in Church Road or Stonebridge or Broadwater Farm or a place that's a tough place to grow up. The vast majority of Black people are just doing normal stuff, going to college, falling in love, trying to get a job, trying not to be upset with their siblings or their parents or someone. Normal, regular human stuff. It isn't all gangs and violence and badness and jail and so on. Those things exist for sure, but those are not necessarily the center focus, or not even not necessarily. Those are not the center focus of everybody's day all of the time. I get it. Sex, drugs, and violence sells, so part of it is just that. But there does seem to still be a particular attraction to those kinds of things being centerfold. And again, that's not unique to Black people. Crime and thriller is a huge genre in and of itself. But I think, again, seeing Black characters just doing normal stuff, as radical as that sounds, is extremely radical and extremely important and important to be empathized with. So I think all of those sorts of things, controlling our own creativity, being able to select when we house our IP internally and develop it internally, at what point it's ripe for collaboration, at what point it makes sense to sell it off. Obviously, some streamers' business models are to acquire everything and you don't own any of it, and they move on with it, and that's their model, and that's fine, and that is what it is. People know what they're getting into. Recognizing that we are in a very privileged industry, but nonetheless fighting for space within that industry and fighting to be seen, and knowing the importance of telling our stories in a particular way, and understanding that everyone has a hard journey to get stuff made. So it's not always unique to one's itself, and we can take solace in the fact that everyone has a hard journey to getting stuff made, and it takes a very, very long time. And I think all of those things are useful things to think about, and useful things to consider. And I really, really look forward to really trying to make some great stuff over the coming years. I have a really exciting slate of projects. We're in talks with a number of important and prominent talent with whom we want to collaborate and build and continue to be part of this wave of brilliant creatives that are making some really, really interesting and fascinating and beautiful stuff. I'd like to come over to you guys for questions. Thank you very much.
Have we got any questions, please? Let's take this opportunity. Question. We have a question already. Would you say, Lily, can you put it up on stage for us? That question that we have.
Maybe, sorry.
Question, Akala. Would you say that Tyler Perry's has created anonymous
A legacy.
Yeah, I can see the question. I can read it out if you want. I can see the chat.
Would you say that Tyler Perry has created a legacy for Black people in generations to come? Or are the storylines too stereotypical, too much of a stereotypical narrative in a way that hinders or holds back Black people from progressing? What do you reckon, Akala?
Great question.
That's a really good question. Here's what I would say. The number of Black actors that I've seen come out and say the biggest check they ever got was from Tyler Perry. He supported them in this way. He did this, he did that. So I'm not going to sit here and rain on another man's parade. He's now in a position where he does have this massive studio. Would I have chosen to make, me personally, all of those stories? Perhaps not. But the position he's got himself into, he really has power to decide what stories he commissions and doesn't commission now, and power to pay people what they're worth and to influence people and so on and so forth. So I think there's room for all sorts of Black stories. I don't take the position of you're a Black creative, you have a responsibility. I used to when I was young and probably a bit more self-righteous, think that, every Black person should do this or should do that. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel that other group, and it may be unfortunate, and because of racism, we always feel we have to represent, but there are plenty of stereotypical white stories. There are plenty of white families on Jerry Springer, and some of those are reflective of very real behaviors. We all understand intrinsically that kind of behavior is a small portion of white people. So what is needed is a broader range of Black stories overall, not, I think, necessarily taking aim at individual Black creatives and saying, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't tell that story, you should do that, you shouldn't, so on and so forth. We could say that about hip hop, right? But within hip hop, you have Outkast, Jurassic 5, Mobb Deep, The Lox, Lauryn Hill, Fugees. You have a very broad representation of Black life within hip hop. If people gravitate only to the more negative and stereotypical elements of hip hop, I think that says as much about them as it does about the genre. I think similarly, all of the shows I've ever watched about Italian American life are about the mob. And yet I have enough intelligence to know most Italians are not in the mafia. So I think we've also got to say, if audiences watch shows with Black people doing crime and come to the conclusion, and I'm just taking crime as a stereotype, and come to the conclusion that all Black people are criminals, I think that says a lot about the person watching the TV show. So I think there has to be some responsibility from people watching shows wanting to believe negative things about Black people because they saw it on the television. Because I've never watched a show about Italians that wasn't about the mafia. And yet we all know intrinsically 99% Italians are not in the mafia. And Italian Americans did have a lot of these criticisms of The Sopranos. But I don't think that's what the rest of us took from The Sopranos, that all Italians were in the mob. I think what the rest of us took from The Sopranos was Italian families are just as weird and wonderful and screwed up and strange and loving as the rest of us, right? Italian Americans may have been particularly sensitive about being stereotyped as members of the mafia. But I don't think that's necessarily what a person who's not a member of that community took from it. That's not what I took from it. So I try and at this stage in my life to not ever put down other Black creators and their work unless I think it's actively like like genuinely destructive. And I think it's hard to get those kind of shows made anymore. What I try to champion now is a broader range of stories being told.
I think 100. I think we all agree. We had a conversation with the gentleman who made guest star, and it was a similar conversation that we had in terms of should these stories be made? There's no judgment about this story should be made. It's just making sure we have a broader range of stories so that people can reflect what's good, bad in all communities. Have you got any questions in there? Oh, it's
Team Webster.
Team Webster.
Hello, hi everybody. Hi.
Hey.
I'm pretty much the development edtech. Can you leave available development?
Can you come closer to the screen? Because for some reason, when the person is close with the mic is closer to the screen, I can hear you better. I have no idea why.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you much better now.
I feel like Graham Norton. It's bad, isn't it?
It's all good, bro.
Firstly, Akala, thank you so much for your talk. That was really, really insightful. One thing which really kind of resonates with me is talking about inspiration and people waiting for inspiration and people in television and, you know, finding inspiration and, you know, doing it on the daily. Obviously, in this time, you know, finding inspiration, particularly with the downturn and with lots of people out of work, production companies shutting down, you know, feels like it's harder and harder to do every day. And I think another thing is finding that resilience as well. And you talked about, you know, being a sports star and then, you know, being in music and now starting your own production company. To me, it sounds like you're a man that has a lot of resilience and finds a lot of inspiration. I wondered, how do you find all that? Like, how do you, what depths do you plow every day to be able to find that resilience and inspiration to keep you doing the things that you do?
Good question.
No, thank you. That's a really great question. I don't want to be one of these people that romanticizes having a tough upbringing because I came out of it the other end. I think the truth is most people that have a challenging upbringing, it crushes them. What I will say is just to give some context, you know, on the face of it, you know, quite stereotypical upbringing. Dad wasn't in the home, but actually dad lived with his other family. So it wasn't the story that people think. My dad and the woman he got with after my mum broke up are still together 42 years later. So I had a visual of a quote unquote stable family, teenage parents. My mum got very, very sick when I was quite young, just as I was entering secondary school. And of course we were bruck, like bruck. And so I think juggling all of that, having an unwell parent, trying to play professional football was actually quite good in school academically, but teachers against me and so on, and I think those pressures very, very early in life and essentially failing, you know, I wanted to be a professional footballer for all sorts of reasons. I got to a stage and it didn't work out. I didn't love the game enough anymore. I wasn't disciplined enough. I started partying too much, all sorts of reasons why I didn't continue playing football, but it was really, really heartbreaking for me. I don't think it would be possible to ever experience that level of professional disappointment ever again. And so in a weird way, when you're a teenager, an impressionable teenager, and you fail at or fall out of love with this thing that you've done since you were 9 years old, I don't think any adult professional setback could ever hit me that way. I've had many professional setbacks as a musician. I've not been playlist on the radio. I've had challenges putting together my touring team. I've had all sorts of setbacks as a musician and as an entrepreneur and with everything we've done. And I think part of that resilience comes from, yes, one, I think challenging upbringing, two, having been an athlete, but three, actually failing a lot. It would be easy for people to look and only see the successes and go, yeah, but my man's done this and this and this. And so it's easy for him to be resilient because, no, actually what made me resilient was I failed a lot, and having to cope with the pain of failure and setback really, really early in life means you realize, oh, this is just part of what it is. From the perspective of, you know, of outsiders, it looks like I just started a production company recently, right? Knowing that actually I've been doing it since 2011 and only got investment in 2023 after, you know, being a double best-selling author, touring as a musician, doing many, many things to get to a stage where my company was viable for that. Now it looks like a very, very different proposition, doesn't it? If it's from 20, if we look at the journey just in TV, that's forgetting all the stuff I'd already done in music and hip hop, Shakespeare, and all that stuff before 2011. From 2011 to 2023, that's 12 years, right? Of grinding and trying to get stuff made and getting told no. I mean, we were running hip hop Shakespeare during the 2012 Olympics. We didn't get any commissions during that time, even though we were quite prominent on the TV and in the news and doing stuff that was around Shakespeare and so on. And so there's been many, many no's and many, many setbacks. I wouldn't want you to think that there haven't been. And part of that resilience is precisely because I've had so many of them. I think in terms of inspiration, a lot of writers especially talk to me about writer's block. Like there's no such thing, right? And here's why I say that. I say that not to be arrogant. If your friend texts you a question, you'll always text them back, right? So you can always write. What writer's block is, in my view, is writers struggling to cope with the fact that 99% of what we write is absolute garbage, myself included, right? 99% of it is absolute crap. The first draft, rubbish. You read your first draft and you go, oh my God, am I an idiot? Do I have no brain in my head? Am I really this stupid that what I'm writing is this rubbish? I promise you that experience is not unique to you. The difference between, if you read even Stephen King's book on writing, the guy's written 77 novels or whatever, right? All bestsellers. Even him, he's like, I read my first draft and I think, what idiot wrote this? Right? So writer's block, in my view, is when writers can't cope with the pain of how bad the first draft is. And so we choose not to put the words on the page because of the pain, understandable, pain and insecurity of how bad the first draft is. But once you realize even many of the best writers in the world and most successful writers in the world go through that pain and they push through it, I think that helps with quote unquote what we call inspiration. When you approach your creative process like any other job, turn up at the job every day, work on your skills, try and get that little bit better. Or like being an athlete. If you go into the gym, right? Anyone who trains in this room in the gym knows most of your sessions are kind of average. Some of them are rubbish. Some of them are excellent. And yet the pride you feel for showing up at the gym every day, 4 times a week, 5 times a week, that proudness you feel in yourself that you just got in and got it done, we should apply that, I believe, to creativity also. So to the gentleman's question and to close on that, finding that inspiration, I think, comes from making that commitment to yourself. I saw someone say somewhere, discipline is a form of self-love, right? And that pride you feel in yourself when you, let's say, training, because I like exercise, and when you train and you keep up a routine 3 or 4 times a week, I think applying that same pride to your creativity, if you just said, right, I'm just going to talk about writers here because writing is what I know best, but I think you apply this to everything, photography, directing, whatever it is. If you turn up and say, I'm going to do 500 words every single day, no matter what happens, no matter how bad they are, no matter how much it annoys me, no matter how much it hurts, if you just start at 500 words, I promise you, if you keep that up for 30 days, in 30 days time, you'll have something good there that you can build inspiration from and that you can feel proud of. You add another 30 days to that and another 30 days to that, and all of a sudden, I mean, you can just add up what that would be, 500 words times 90 days, right? So.
Wonderful. I so agree. And everything you're saying is committed of the survival, the most committed in this moment. Have you got any more questions? I would like to push the mic in your face. Please wait. I'm coming soon. I'm coming. I've seen you. I see a question. No, I will do that as well. So.
I think you have to come to the 3.
I'm not going to compete with you.
I think the place 1 minute.
Stand next to Celia. Come this way.
I'm going to try and do it back here.
Okay, good.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
I think it's really exciting. Thank you very much for everything you said. I mean, I think spot on in so many ways. I'd like to ask a very business question. So what sort of co-pros and stuff are you looking for? Like, how do we collaborate with you?
Good question. Thank you. To be fair, that kind of business style question is more a question from our business partner, Chanel Newman. She sort of, I'm being real, she oversees and steers the business side of what we do and the structure of those deals. And each time it's on really a case by case basis. But to give an example of something working, I can't speak about what it specifically is, but for example,
just to clarify, so just to jump in,
Yeah.
just clarify, I mean, more just in creatively, I don't mean in terms of deal structure, I just mean like, what kind of thing? Are you looking at documentary,
Absolutely.
fiction, and you're looking at
Okay,
what kind
great.
of thing you, like, rings your bell?
Yeah, absolutely. So our slate is probably a little bit biased towards historical stuff because of my bias as a historian. So more contemporary stuff in terms of scripted is definitely needed. We've got a few contemporary projects there, but I think we're a little bit weighted towards historical just because I love history so much. So contemporary, and I like to push the boat out. Believe it or not, I think as a musician, because it's very personal to me as an individual and it's not characters. As a musician, I think I've always had a particular political message and felt the responsibility to do that, and probably steered away from drugs and sex and violence and all of those parts of the human condition because I've wanted to steer away from them in my own real life. I saw many of those things growing up and didn't want to perpetuate that in my music. I think, however, in drama, you have so much more space to explore consequence and nuance that I think I would be open to doing things creatively that people probably wouldn't think I would do. I have no problem writing a black crime drama, for example. In fact, one of the first scripts I wrote was that. I think what's important is that every black character is a whole human being, not that every black character is good. Requiring black people to be morally pure in a way that no large group of human beings are, to feel empathy for them, or Asian people, or women, or people from outer Mongolia, is an unreasonable expectation. There's no group of people who are that way. Stories are a form of exploring the maddening contradictions of the human condition. And so I'm open to all sorts of creative stuff, but mostly contemporary. Obviously, I like stuff with a political leaning or something to say about the world in a perspective, and I have my own political biases, but contemporary at the moment, and just really interesting angle stuff. In terms of non-scripted, because our slate is split between scripted and non-scripted, there it is definitely much more, I feel like, my personal interests skew towards politics and history and creativity, really, celebrations of human achievement and so on and so forth. And I think this next one would have to be the last one, I think.
Wonderful. Have we got any more questions? Thank you.
Georgie.
Hello.
Hey.
This question is around, we've talked about all these amazing shows that have come out recently. Obviously, Shogun is one, and the one that I feel very passionately about because I'm also Japanese. But I feel like in the UK, we have this, the UK industry has a tendency to hide behind the successes of the US. And I think in reality, a show like Shogun would never be made in the UK. So I guess my question is around, how do we hold the UK industry to account for that? Or do we not? Is it best for us just to take those projects to the US, to other markets that want our stories? Because it's, there's a huge conflict for me as a British filmmaker wanting to make projects here because this is where I'm from, but knowing that I could get a lot of my projects off the ground if I took them to the US. And actually my entire slate right now is being developed in the US. But that feels like a very painful place to be. So yeah, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that.
I'm laughing because, I mean, part of it, I don't want to let the UK off the hook at all. So we'll come to that part in a second. I think part of it is economies of scale. America is the center of the global entertainment industry. It's 300 and something million people. It has a very clear global soft power play that it's making. Hollywood is one of the leading industries in America. There's so many reasons why the American industry is unique. So part of it is just a business case, but then part of it really is real barriers. I mean, if we think about the kind of roles Idris Elba was being given before he went to the States, we should, as an industry, be hanging our head in shame that a man of that level of talent, and he's just one of many, had to go to America to get roles commensurate with his abilities. And the exodus of UK black acting talent is just one example of all of that. I think what you said about Shogun is true. I think partly that's cost, but I think partly it is true. It'd be really difficult for British production companies to make even though, remember, the protagonist is a British guy, which is what's ironic. It would be very difficult, I think, for them to make a show with that level of respect and nuance and brilliance and beauty that so centered Japanese culture in that way. And the lead Japanese actor in it, his name does escape me, I apologize. But I've watched loads of interviews with him in it, talking about exactly that. He's like, listen, I'll do it, but we're going to do this properly Japanese. Like, it's not going to be no ignorant person's version of what Japanese culture is. We're going to do this. And the main thing is going to be that authenticity. And guess what? It turns out audiences are much smarter, much more nuanced, much more caring than people think. And that authenticity is why the show was so successful. And we could go across a number of those shows that I keep quoting that are non-English language shows. And the reason why I think they've been so successful is because they were authentic in that way. So there is a business case actually now for not being ignorant about other cultures, not stereotyping other cultures, investing in things. But the truth also is that nobody knows what's going to be successful. There's that classic book, Adventures of the Screen Trade. And in it, he lists all of the projects at the beginning, not all of, but like a load of anecdotes about projects that people said no to or passed over, or talks about when Disney gave up Star Wars and so on and so forth. And he interviewed an exec very high at Disney. And the guy said, you know what? If I'd said yes to all of the things I said no to and said no to all of the things I said yes to, the financial result would have been about the same. And so part of it, I think, is that no one really knows what's going to hit. And no one really understands before it's done that an audience would follow weird, quirky, strange, out there characters for 100 hours, 200 hours, 500 hours. You look at the Marvel and DC franchise. Before Blade, no one had any idea that the B and C characters within that pantheon could carry a franchise in that way. Blade happens, and all of a sudden everyone goes, oh, we've got all this other IP that we thought was B and C level IP. And it turns out, again, the audience is much more enthusiastic, much more fanatical, much more serious, much more intelligent. I think one of the key pieces of advice I'd give to people, and this is just a personal thing, yes, there is lots of pop here today, gone tomorrow. There's a place for soaps. I have my guilty pleasures, and I don't mind sort of one-dimensional characterization when it's funny and so on. And I grew up watching Home and Away like everyone else, and Neighbours, and loved those shows for what they were. But I think the stuff that really lasts and really makes an impact and is really successful, and ultimately people are going to pay £20 a season for on box set on repeat for the next 50 years because commerce is part of it, is stuff where I think you invest that extra nuance and that extra authenticity. And to the lady specifically who asked the question, I feel your pain, and believe me, every time I'm in the States, I'm actually in the States right now, not to chat my business to the whole world, but I'm actually in the States right now. And what's interesting is every time I'm here, Black American creatives specifically always say to me, why don't you just leave England and come here? Like, what are you still doing here? There'd be such an appetite for what you're doing over there, but here, like, we know you here, we watch your talks online, blah, 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 blah. And there's always this constant pull of America as the promised land. The problem is, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it won't happen and I won't ever work in the States in a very real way, but I feel your pain. If we all do that, if the biggest work that all British TV and film creatives have done continues to come out of America, or rather, the biggest work that Black and brown British creatives have done comes out of America, we never change the landscape at home. That said, I mean, Game of Thrones still had to go to America for money as well. So part of it is the business case of needing American money to make shows viable. And part of it is a very real challenge we have where we probably don't have as many people holding the purse strings. And this is just demographics as well, that get the value of that creativity in the same way. Same is true of the music industry. The Black American music has been the basis of 20th century creative music in the English speaking world. That isn't me overstating Black Americans' contribution to global popular music. That has sort of been what it is. And for that reason, there are loads more people who can sign checks in America, again, because of economies of scale. And therefore, Black American music has a much wider representation and much wider scope and scale. But if you've got to do what you've got to do, to the lady that asked the question, you feel that you need to go to the States, I wouldn't be completely against doing that, because sometimes, and the actors I've named, and this is where I end on it, but all those actors that I've named, them building the leverage they had by being successful in America, then they came back to Britain and we all said, look how wonderful they are. Now we need to give them some shows here, right? So if you have to go to America to build that base for yourself and then use the power and influence and connections and everything else of having been successful in the States to come back to the UK and influence that in the UK industry in the way that Damson Idris and Daniel Kaluuya and Letitia Wright and Idris Elba and all those others who got their big break stateside have had to do, I think that's okay too. I mean, they wouldn't be in the position to do the things that they're doing in the UK now if they hadn't had that American leverage. So you can play both. But I feel the pain and sadness you feel sometimes having to do that. But in the scheme of the world, Britain still has a lot more cultural opportunities to tell stories and be on screen than many, many other countries. So we're still competing in a very privileged landscape compared to, I don't know, people in Brazil or Mexico or elsewhere. That might not always make us feel better because we're not in those countries. But we do have a visibility and a chance and an opportunity that is really quite interesting and quite unique. And I look forward to seeing, I'm sure there's people working on all sorts of great stuff sat here tonight, and I look forward to seeing and hearing about and experiencing all the brilliant and beautiful creativity that's in the room in the years to come. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Just the food. Let me come down here so you can see me. Just for the food and thought that we need. I mean, like, as we say, it's downtown at the moment, and I think that the spirit behind this whole entire festival was to remind people that they don't need permission. All you've got to do is get out and tell your stories. There's still an insatiable appetite for content, still an insatiable appetite for our stories. So just get out there and make it happen. So, Akala, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. And we hope that next time we can have you live in person. I didn't tell them you work in person.
I hope so. Thank you so much. Take care, yeah?
But thank you, Akala. King. We love
Bye.
you.
Love.
This is the moment. I'm so excited. Have you guys heard about Quantum? Do you guys know? Yeah. So my background is Caribbean. Yeah. So when I came, the Windrush community, when I came here, or my grandfather came here, the only way he was able to buy his house was for a apartment system. And essentially, what would happen is Caribbean people would pull their money together. Everyone pulls their money together, one person takes that money, and then they pull their money together, and then one person takes that money.
Yeah.
No, that'd be outside. So what I was doing is one of the biggest issues I think that we have in our industry, particularly as traders, is access to resource and money. So I've been sitting down thinking really hard, how do we crack this? I'm called the collective, so you know I'm about collective support, right? So what we've done is we've partnered with an organization called Be Ethical. They run a charity lottery with lots of different charities. So we're part of a multi-charity lottery, which means there's about 10 charities. Lily? I think
it's about 40 actually.
about 40 charities that all come together on this one platform. They all put money together, and Be Ethical, who manages that charity, then deals with the prize fund. Yeah, so they have a prize fund of 25 every month. But what we got to understand is there's lots of charities. There's not just us charity. There's other charities that might win the money. Because I'm aware of that, what we are going to do is we're going to do smaller amounts of money. So we're going to do smaller pots of money to support people monthly. And we're working with, I've got an announcement, but not right yet. I'm going to just kind of knock up a few things, but we've got an announcement the next couple of weeks where we're going to release the bigger pots of money and invite you guys to apply, and there'll be support around it. But tonight, I feel like we're going to give away pretty goddamn bad. So what Lily's done, Lily's quite amazing. So everybody who signed up to the lottery, and thank you guys for signing up. There's one or two people that as soon as I mentioned it, they were on it. Like, Sonic, I know who you are, I see you, I love you, and I respect you, because that's, well, you know, you got to be in it to win it, right? You got to be the change that you want to see. You can't talk about it, you got to be about it. So these people have signed up to the lottery. We are going to do a random name selector. Lily's going to do something quite mad. I don't know.
Can you even see that?
No, not really.
Selector.
Select yo. Let's do it. Let's run the rhythm. Let's run these things. And let's
All right, Simone, you looking?
I'm looking. It's all backwards. It's in reverse.
All right, fine. Then you're gonna hear me shout the name.
Yeah. Right. So here is this name. pick this name and see who's walking home with £5 today.
No one, me. Okay, let's go.
Let's go, let's go. Let's see who's walking home with £5 today. Who
It's
wants to say-
Rajat.
Richard. My children. Nothing makes sense. Why we going to? I know it's a bit too complicated. What are you going to do that?
It's a content. It's a content.
Absolutely.
Listen, I'm open to being pitched. Pitch it. Whoever's got a great idea, just make it. Serious. Let's take a risk with it. Let's do something really interesting. Yeah, let's do it.
It won't make sense. Because he wants to share his money. He wants to do something. Yeah? £5 content fund. This is how we roll it. So every month. Oh dear. See what happens. Like the reality is that you've got to be in it. Let me say that again. You've got to be in it to do what? Now this is the first of a prize draw every month. We're not going to do £5 yeah, we're up to that. But every month we're going to give a small amount of money. Now the money goes up depending on how many you guys put in. So if you guys put in a lot of money, then we're able to give away money. If you don't, then we're able to put away a small amount. Think of it as a partner. It's not me. My pocket's not deep. The money comes from you guys. So all of us putting in allows us to be able to support content creators like content creators like loads of people. So this is the beginning of the like we talk about being the change. Let's be about it, right? Let's talk about it. Nobody's coming to save us out here. Turn around. Nobody is coming to save us. Nobody isn't coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. We say bonfire to downtown and we say disruption. We say disruption up in here. So guys, listen, we're going to turn it down, Rajesh. Congratulations. I don't know if you want
Please look this way.
I'm shocked and amazed. And can I just say, guys, you've got it. You're £10 now. I mean, gobsmacked. I'm that rare thing, lost for words.
we love that. But put your £10 in. You can also Lily tell them about this gourmet usually big thing that happens with the car.
Oh, right, okay. As well as signing up for £10 a month and getting your potentially £5 if you're a judge, it also gives you 25% of the Gourmet Society Club, which gives you 25% of like days out at theme parks and cinema and takeaways and restaurants. And it also, it's not just like high street shops and cafes and stuff. It's like there's almost everybody in it. There's loads of private restaurants as well, so it's well worth it.
Definitely. So you guys are gonna be in it to win it. Let's run some tracks. Let's pan down the music. Let's pan.
All right, bye
Guys,
everyone.
I love you. It was wonderful. Listen, oh, do you know the secret that was to the moon? It's exciting. Guess what? Don't tell anyone, but Will I Am has confirmed for next year. So what? Listen, love you guys. Sign off. See you later, guys. Lots of love. We're gonna run some videos. We're gonna network. We're gonna just fly. Oh, no, no. Oh, I forgot something. Oh my. Thank you, dear. Let me hold on. How miss of me?
I got word.
How miss of me? This would never be possible. I gotta talk about the black lady in STEM, Miss Lily Dixon. It's bloody amazing. And without you, this wouldn't happen on my social media. Cheers, Lily. I'm very grateful to make you smile.
I'm on a diet. I'm on a diet right now. She got me soup.
it's me from the TV show earlier. I just wanted to take 1 minute because everything, obviously, Lily gets her flowers and she gives her flowers always every week. The email comes through, but I want to give some moment of her flowers. No, it meant so much to hear it and to show it in our coaching. We talk about showing vulnerability and how it brings people in, and to hear why that day that you launched the festival was so important to you was the vulnerability, and you shared it in, and you let us in. And that day for the festival, it's clearly been so much hard work, but it's been absolutely incredible. The content that you put on there, which is still available for people to. One for me, I'm like, well, come over here. The TV is so hard. But it's been amazing content. There's been amazing speakers, but it's all been put together by amazing people behind the scenes. And today we need to give you your flowers and show you the appreciation, because everybody here in this room has been touched by you and by the TV collective. So can everyone just put our hands together, make some big noise, please?
I'm not taking it. I'm not good with words. I love all of that. You're amazing. It's bullshit. It's like so somewhere else. What I really need is you guys to go out and do something. We spent so long putting together this festival with all these amazing speakers, giving you all this amazing freaking advice. Yeah, don't stand up and say, oh, that's wonderful. No, bullshit. Go out and make something. Yeah. Freaking content. That's what will make me happy. Go outside and say, yeah, we did something. Run inside behind our fucking shit. Go out and make something. Listen, turn this shit off. Run the track.